Hello and good day, brothers and sisters. Today, we're out here at the families on the Colorado Prairie, and as you can see, it's a very wet and bit of a dreary day. Couple that with the length of today's talk, and I'm definitely finding myself indoors today. It is cold out today. A little chilly. All right. So today I wanted to talk about anarchy, isms, and how isms or belief systems are replacing your identity and declaring authority over your life. Now recently I did a talk on ism and I touched on the foundation of ism and generally defined ism, but in this talk I fully intend to go into the depth with the definition and etymology of ism and how these isms are fooling people and how they're applied in our real world. This way we can see why anarchy has nothing to do with anarchism, and we can get a really good understanding of ism. So for this, I'm splitting this talk into two parts. In this first part, I'm going to spend time on talking about the etymology of anarchy and the use of ism in anarchism. I'll be looking in the words that define authority so we can understand how they are applied on paper and in the real world. And we touch on some social points, but primarily, we're going to be looking at the philosophy more in the second part. So first, before we really dive in, I do want to say a few things here, and I want to start off by saying that my endeavors in this area of thought and action, they've all been under the guidance and discernment of the Spirit-led and Spirit-taught. Over the years, I've been brought back time and time again, inspired to read and study the history, plus, the personal research through social and thought mediums for experiments done by myself and on myself and others. Also, while considering all the text available through the academic archives containing, but not limited to, the philosophy and the past attempts at societies, addressing the facts, the myths, and the evolution, I've read a lot of documents, so many documents, all the many documents available through the many universities, encyclopedias, and whatever else the internet could muster up. So while, some may think my talk to be just some personal feeling or idea and opinions, which essentially would amount to nothing, right? But they aren't. I'm pointing out facts. I'm just a messenger. And I spent time in these areas of thought and with the use of logical and spiritual discernment, so I only wish to offer the truth of these matters in the most forthcoming, most transparent and comprehensible ways possible. For me to have this understanding, it's important for several reasons. Much of my experience, education, and understanding is, like I said, brought through the Spirit. And so it takes a kind of mentality to land here. And it's not the mentality that most people have. And sadly, as we know, most people prefer the comforts of modern society and don't mind trading off a few morals and or rights for a lifestyle that requires less accountability. And folks don't like their foundation stirred or shaken. They want to be left alone to their devices and their luxuries. And with this mentality, folks usually prefer to leave the big issues in the hands of the big brother, right? With the faith that all will be well. This is a lot like children, They don't want to worry about anything. They leave everything to the authority. Let the adult do it, sort of thing. But for me, myself, and the way I'm raising my family, the Spirit has led me and shaped me since I was a child, guiding me through this journey of life, bringing about the mentality and the lifestyle, including the education and experiences, which all have helped bring me to one obvious conclusion. Anarchy, not anarchism, not ism. With spiritual guidance and discernment, encouraging my experience, reading and educating myself has helped elevate my consciousness to a point that I can see past anarchism, and now I have an understanding of what it means, and I really hope to share that understanding with you all here today. I believe it is something important to comprehend and utilize in our lives because it is promised to us as a reward or a blessing for doing our part. This whole study in the anarchy and anarchism happened for me years ago and began with myself being entirely fed up trying to jump from one end to the other in discussions that transforms into debates, usually concerning points or important topics. Now, while the opposition is always lacking the fundamental skills in comprehending the everyday use of the English language. And so it just so happened that the last straw for me was pulled during a discussion about anarchism years ago. So for today's talk, I'm going to look at a few things. I am addressing the issue of ism and its effects, specifically over the topic of anarchism, anarchist, and anarchy. Also, it is important to have this talk for the matters of self-identity and for the matters of community. This topic, like most philosophical and political topics, if you're discussing them with strangers or folks who are easy to emotion types of people, there's usually a good chance it's going to end in an argument or a screaming match, which personally I can't stand. I'd rather fancy the quote by Robert Quillen. It's a good one when he says, "A discussion is an exchange of knowledge. An argument is an exchange of ignorance." Now, in the past, as a young adult, I've spent time humoring the idea of anarchism, nothing crazy, but I have, as a young adult, flirted with the ideals, engaging in self-education, tuning my awareness, and of course communicating with others that shared the same or similar ideas at that time. And recently, in past years, I've had the discussions with those who have had those ideas now, and I've been listening extra attentively and pondering the different takes from these different communities. What I'm finding is that there seems to be different ideas about freedom, specifically at the standpoint of anarchy and anarchism. So to understand anarchism, we'll need to go back to its inception, back to its time in a very different society that we know now. And yet, before I can even get into the history and the philosophy of anarchy, anarchism, or anarchist, before I can even begin to open the philosophy of social systems in order to understand the ism, first, I must address the technical details that are being misrepresented, redefined, or just flat out ignored by modern anarchists and scholars alike. So definitely make sure you catch part 2. It will be important for a complete understanding. Now, people often associate anarchism with anarchy, and I can understand why. They sound similar. They appear to have the same root word. So what's the big deal, right? Looks like a duck, right? Well, no. Semantics, really. Yeah, the big bad word, semantics. It really shouldn't be that scary, especially if you're interested in those pesky facts. Unfortunately, we have to rely on such semantics because language is losing its meaning and people are losing the ability to critically examine, understand, or even apply any real piece of information, observance, or wisdom to real life scenarios. People often need to be told what, and through my experience in education, the best way for me to convey the ideas and the points that I need to convey, it's going to be essential that we refresh our minds with these very basic definitions and English language rules. After all, my picking through the semantics should resolve any misunderstandings or disagreements with the word definitions and etymology and get us on the same page. So, semantics. Let's get started. First, concerning word semantics and definition, there's a couple things I want to say. I want to share a quote I agree with, though personally, I don't mind words and personal words and definitions, but it should be something that's mutually understood between the parties involved. So it's unrealistic and very difficult to engage with others, especially strangers, and expect them to know your private words and definition and the way you use them. Language is difficult enough, so when we engage with others, we should automatically expect the default use of the language we are using as intended, or at least until a relationship or understanding is developed among one another. So English is a strict language with lots of rules. And so the quote goes like this. Some people contend that the English language is a living, breathing organism, wherein the definitions of words and rules should change to reflect their mass misuse. I contend that the English language is an extraordinary difficult language to teach. Monkeying with English to legitimize common errors would not make the language easier to learn and love. English should not stoop to embrace the lowest common denominator. Rather, society should step up and grant the language the respect it deserves. Terry Fallis from The Best Laid Plans. Fantastic. I love it. First, let us all recognize that we are using the English language, and it is defined as a system. And like all systems, there are standards, which we're going to get far more into depth later. But for now, referring to language in the English language system, the standards set forth have been taught to many of us through some form of schooling. Throughout that English schooling, we were taught a series of rules on how to apply and use letters and words. It's important to realize words are formed from the very need of them, much like our technology, and these words are defined very specifically and thoroughly, as we're told by top-notch academic minds from long ago and even now. Now, to define what words mean, we use a very important tool. It's called a dictionary. It informs us of what words mean so we can communicate our ideas, thoughts, and perspectives, and it guides us on how to apply them. It is extremely important that we define and use words as they were meant to be used. Words, language, are a form of or a system of expression, a vessel or vehicle of sorts for meaning in the definitive. Oxford defines word as the single most distinctful element of speech or writing, so I think it's safe to say that words are powerful, and to use them wrong can be deceitful, intentional or not. This is true even without considering resonant frequency and the effects that the spoken word can have on our reality. It would be insulting to the realm of the rationale to insist otherwise. Oxford also identifies language as a structured method or a system, and like any system, we must adhere to the standard of the system we consent to. In this case, it's consensual engagement, the use of the language. Or the system, it will not function properly, if at all. For example, the dictionary is a guide to words, or manifested organized rules of the structured system of a language. Or otherwise said, words are the product of the strict rules that formulate them. Standardized words become the holders or enforcers in a language. Words recognize and uphold the rules of the English language in terms of meaning so we can understand definition. So if we ignore these rules of grammar, word formulation, and definition, the standard of the English language becomes tarnished, thus making it nonsense and devalues it completely coming from the speaker. Now, as I've come to realize the flaws of the anarchism and anarchists, the best chance I've had to try to explain to others is through the use of words and what they mean, because my philosophy, or anyone's for that matter, really doesn't seem to be good enough for today's modern advocates. So, to be clear, I'm not here to play a semantic word game to tear down anarchy or anarchism or anarchists. Actually, no, as I've said, I've spent some time supporting it. And even if I don't support it now, and I haven't in ages, I believe it could be a gateway to the next step. That is, if the practitioners, the members, don't get too carried away in the ism. Also, anarchy provides a great position of opposition to which I can contrast and make the necessary points. And so I contrast anarchy and anarchism because they give a great example to a situation that is being applied in several other areas in our realities, and the truth is being hidden right in front of us. In the same manner. Very similar tactics, you see. So I'd realized something. And this is the best attempt I could make at explaining it, and in my experience, sadly, it's coming down to word semantics. I would also mention the behaviors and the ideologies I've seen in real life with anarchists that I've engaged with along the way exhibits people, that argue semantics when the points are misunderstood or can be challenged. So I've taken the time to describe the breakdown of these words ahead of time so that way we can have a clear understanding of who and what anarchy, anarchism, and anarchists are according to the English language versus our opinions and versus reality. And as I said, we'll do this before discussing the historical philosophies from these groups, so regardless how passionate you are, may or may not feel about this topic, we're getting into it. So, now, looking for the English standards in order to have this understanding, I looked to the Oxford Dictionary and the Merriam-Webster Dictionary. They've held the highest standard in English language since the 1800s. Now, don't be mistaken, it's not that I hold them so high personally, rather, it is the official global standard. And they do a fairly decent job, but they are far from perfect. In fact, we're going to bring fallacies from these sources to light in this talk. So, if anyone can think of any higher standard or even equal to these two, and that source says something different, I would love to hear about it. I would also mention that from the time I began investigating this topic and gathering information and all the facts which would support my claims to now, years later, looking to express my understanding to you all on a video, the times have changed greatly and the resources aren't as available as they once were. And for a good example is the Oxford dictionaries. Now they offer a simple dictionary for free, and it seems that if you want the definitions that I sometimes cite here in this talk, you'd have to pay for a subscription from Oxford to access the premium dictionary. Now, I get overhead and costs and all that, but considering the institution and all, there's nothing like charging for basic everyday knowledge. Society's circling the drain, so nice work. Anyway, let's begin. I'll do my best to keep this as objective and as simple as possible. So now with a quick Google search, by typing in anarchy definition, it seems between both sources, Oxford and Webster, we can see that going back to the Middle English, we have archi, arch, and then back to the Old English, RC, I'm butchering it, I know, and Anglo-French arch, from the late Latin arch and Latin arche, which adopted, came all the way back from the Greek arch and archi, from archein, meaning to begin, rule, akin to the Greek arche, beginning, meaning begin, rule, and archos, meaning ruler. So now we can see that anarchy comes from the Greek prefix an or ab, which means without, the absence of, and the Greek noun archon, which means master, ruler. So anarchy adopts the root arch from archon, because we took the root word from medieval Latin anarchia, which came from the Greek anarchos, having no rule, arch being rule. Therefore the word anarch altogether literally means without rule. And then we add the suffix y and we have the state of no rule. Although it seems scholars have evolved or blurred the word into without rulers, without masters, somehow insisting there can still be rules, just not rulers. The etymology is clear, but regardless how you choose to define anarchy, there can be no rules. I want to address the fallacy created by those who claim that anarchy can have rules, because it can't. As a result of no rulers, masters, there could be no rules, because the rules are the essence of rulers. It's even in the name, it's what they do. Arch means rule, from archon, meaning ruler, chief, principal, etc., all the same. Therefore, if there is any ruler in the equation, he cannot rule without a set of rules. If there is no ruler, then there could be no rules. But if there is no figurehead, that's different. There's no figurehead to uphold the rules, then the rules themselves become the rules. It doesn't need a figurehead. Figureheads are replaced. It's what the rules do. They rule. So this idea that anarchy may have rules without a ruler is a really strange one to me, because it's literally impossible. An oxymoron by definition, and in contrast to objective reality. And as a result of this blurred definition for anarchy, it becomes confusing for the average anarchist. This anarchist idea that there can be rules appears to be an idea that lies solely with the ism, thus anarchism. In fact, it is now recognized in political science and the study of international relations. Unfortunately, Britannica, Oxford, Webster, and so many of these others, they smudge the etymology of anarchy, as well as placing anarchy in an improper group. Now, because of this, people go on to talk about anarchy as if it's anarchism. This is especially important that we pay attention to the words, especially with the ones I'm using, the definitions of words I'm defining, because they tend to carry over from word to word. Not quite synonymous, but birds of a feather, right? So hopefully here shortly, it should start to draw somewhat of a clear picture in your mind as to where anarchism and anarchists actually are. And I would most definitely say it is not with anarchy. Oxford defines anarchy: a state of disorder due to an absence or non-recognition of authority or other controlling systems. And from the Oxford Premium Dictionary, their second definition is absence of government and absolute freedom of the individual regarded as a political ideal. Or the oxymoronic definition from Oxford Reference: a political system characterized by absence of central governance in which individuals have complete freedom to govern themselves. And really, that's what I get from most anarchists as well. Now, when we understand the etymology and know what anarchy actually means, we know that we can't have complete freedom to govern yourself, because it is impossible to have governance and actual freedom in the same sentence. But you can have innate authority over oneself, and this is different. This is what we call inalienable rights, or this is what leads to what's called inalienable rights. And folks get confused about this, I guess, but it's, depending on your consciousness, let's just say you can have the freedom to govern yourself, but that wouldn't be anarchy. Anarchy is without rulers and masters. And yes, creating rules for yourself would still be you living by a set of rules, which by definition alone would not be anarchy. Your consensual use of the rules changes nothing. Also, you absolutely cannot have complete freedom or anarchy existing within a political system at the same time. That attempt would be what we call anarchism. And by definition, ism would not be freedom. We really must be mindful of what we're consuming here and use a little bit of sense. Webster's definition of anarchy states absence of government, a state of lawlessness or political disorder due to the absence of governmental authority, a utopian society of individuals who enjoy complete freedom without government, absence or denial of any authority or established order. Webster also defines lawlessness by saying, and I quote, as in anarchy, a state in which there is widespread wrongdoing and disregard for rules and authority, end quote. It seems these dictionaries are insisting that the absence of governance is a chaotic or destructive thing, that it in itself is a wrongdoing. But the definition of etymology don't actually say that, nor does it mean that it's a destructive thing definitively. More importantly, notice it is described as a state or a state of being, and as a result from a particular. So now, besides the clear definition for lawlessness that is given, our being taught into believing that we need government for civility gives us the undertones that this being without government is somehow very negative, and yet in actuality, it's not inherently good or bad. And so, meanwhile, it is hard to ignore the undertones of Oxford's contradictory and oxymoronic definition. It gets worse in the premium definition when Oxford defines anarchy as an organization. And if we understand what organization is, then we know that there's orders and rules. Hence organization. That's not anarchy. That's anarchism. It is sneaky to say that you can be completely free while also being subject to a system that requires your thoughts and actions to be aligned with the interests of the system. Really, that's nonsense. Right? No, let's just look at how, let's look at how Oxford lays the heavy insinuation that anarchy definitively results in chaos. And I think it's a great example of how scholars have misunderstood and have blurred some of the lines along the way. I believe for anarchy to be a destructive force is impossible. Anarchy is the state of something, not the cause of something. It cannot be destructive nor bring destruction, unlike the ignorance of man, which is very destructive. Folks are confusing anarchy for what happens in the form of ism, specifically anarchism. Ism is the moving force that brings about destruction. It does not matter what the ism is attached to, it just destroys. So because good and bad are subjective, what is called chaos is also subjective. They often describe anarchy with subjective terms like chaos, and because the word chaos is subjective, it requires subjective beliefs. And again, beliefs, which mean ism, which means to adopt and give authority to another man's creation, typically based upon one's consciousness and foresight. And so the outcomes of so-called chaos is going to also be viewed subjectively. Now, beyond the subjectivity of scholars, the chaos part of a scenario they are inaccurately pinning on anarchy could only take place if everyone would lose hope and believes there's no order or rules anymore, which appeals to ism because it's a belief, and belief defines ism. So the breakdown of a system which always creates panic stems from ism, and if it becomes anarchism, then social justice will be the rule, and or eventually, survival of the fittest. This in itself would cause a lot of foolish reactions from many among the masses. All of these things are elements that are of, or directly define, ism. They do not and cannot define anarchy. Though they try, practicing ism and then suffering the literal breakdown of that ism does encourage and can create an environment where those who are controlled by an ism will act foolish in the face of losing the ism, projecting a mental breakdown or instability, typically through violence and all sorts of irrationality. They may lash out in a way that is based on their beliefs, so they lash out in a defensive way that shows support for their ism or system, potentially in a violent, aggressive, or malicious manner. Something we might see during societal civil breakdown. It would be very chaotic. Now, the difference is, anarchy is the state of no rulers. It is not in any way officially being defined to mean chaos, just simply without rule. Despite this, Man's ideologies insist anarchy is definitive death and destruction. But really, the fact is that anarchy, it's not inherently good or evil, it just is. Any opinion or attitude that definitively labels anarchy as something positive or negative, it's all perspective, and usually it's an opinion meant for anarchism and not anarchy. Only ism can mislead man into this little trick, right? And so now if anarchism is brought on by a broken system and then perhaps becoming widespread because of disaster in politics or the environment, as opposed to, mass consent, the already panic of civil unrest up to that point would obviously be a too big a stressor for anarchism to unfold peacefully. And so the obvious route is a chaotic end if we just flip the switch and get rid of government, because that's what people believe. And so fine, you can have it, have your chaos, but that's not anarchy. That's anarchism. So clearly so. Even though anarchism, like all isms, would end in disaster, I'm trying to humor anarchism in the best light possible, while keeping it as sensible and objective as possible to make the necessary points. That way I can contrast anarchism specifically, the ism part, with anarchy. So we're not going to humor this line of thinking right now with the chaos, because it would end the discussion right here and right now, and with failure as being the outcome. That's not anarchy though. That's anarchism. And so we're going to disregard that chaos definition of anarchism because it's endlessly subjective. There are more definitions worth discussing otherwise, and so moving forward, right? Let's do it. The people who are anarchists now in a so-called orderly world are not anarchists because of a broken down system or because they want chaos. That's a Hollywood fairy tale. And actually, anarchists, they tend to disregard the possibility of disaster because they are discussing an implementation through consent. And, not because of a broken system, but because of a broken morality in the practice of ism or the forced governance. So if you ask me, the system is working fine. It's doing what it's made to do. Not that that's a good thing, but so far we know anarchy is without rules and therefore must insist on no rulers. That right there, from a literary perspective, should tell us that you can't even have an unspoken agreement of regulation or unspoken rules or order, as it's properly defined, and also have anarchy. It is impossible, and I'm going to show you when I break down those words a little later. So let's continue, and let's continue with ism, because if we actually understand what what ism means as a suffix, then hopefully it'll give us a clear, more identical understanding of what these words mean. Help make more sense for everyone. I think people just breeze over ism, don't really think about it. And so, as a reminder, if you haven't seen my quick talk on ism, make sure you go back and watch that, because that will definitely help. We talk about a lot of that stuff and we go a little deeper on this talk. But anyway, follow me. Let's take a look. Webster defines ism as a distinctive doctrine, cause, theory, it's a noun, which is, we're going to cover that. Suffix, act, practice, process, right? Prejudice or discrimination on the basis of a specified attribute. State, condition, property, abnormal state, or condition resulting from an excess of a specified thing, or marked by a resemblance to such a person or thing. Doctrine, theory, religion, adherence to a system or a class of principles. And mind you, doctrines and principles are a type of ism. They offer a controlling authority within them, so they do it through ideas. Your consent changes nothing. Oxford defines ism as a distinctive practice, system, or philosophy, typically a political ideology or an artistic movement. Now, we can see all the words that I've been mentioning. The ism is including in all these words. Practice, system, philosophy, and doctrine. Right? All these types of controlling forces, because they're offering up a type of rules within them. So you cannot have anarchy and also practice it. It is not something you practice. You cannot have anarchy established by principles or philosophies organized into a system. This is literally the opposite of the definition of anarchy. And because of these things require rules and authority over the practitioner, it's impossible. All of these things take away your individuality and they create a general whole to be ruled. Ism removes your identity and replaces it with the abstract. That's the sole purpose of ism, and therefore it cannot be anarchy. Let's look closer. We can see ism as being defined as a system, And so, to be as clear as possible, let's take a closer look at system. Merriam-Webster defines system as a regularly interacting or interdependent group of items forming a unified whole, such as a form of social, economic, or political organization or practice, an organized set of doctrines, ideas, or principles usually intended to explain the arrangement or workings of a systematic whole, an organized or established procedure. And this sounds an awful lot like anarchists describing anarchism and anarchist communities, and this is why we tend to hear these key words when they are describing their communities: doctrines, principles, philosophies, unspoken rules, and such. Let us not disregard the many times we see politics being used to define some of these words too. Now, we really get a sense of authority, rules, and control when we are defining words like system or suffix ism. They're very similar, really. They are the same thing in different forms. And this is important to remember, to know, because if it is an ism, then clearly it requires your servitude for it to exist. It requires regulatory acceptance. And so now right there, well, I apologize for this extra dry, extra long recap of basic terminology, but from experience, as I've said, this is where I find it gets difficult for folks. People tend to go off the rails and begin to argue the semantics first. So we're preemptively taking, we're talking semantics preemptive today first. We're doing it first. And it seems tedious, but I like to go further and take some of the words I just mentioned with these definitions and just define a layer or two deep. Now, hopefully, I am explaining everything well enough so there's no misunderstanding here. This is an important topic for myself personally, and in line with other talks that I have and I plan to make about community and self-identity. So, the technicalities these terms have, they need to be properly picked apart, defined, and fresh in the mind for me to connect the dots and make the appropriate points. So please bear with me. I'll be as quick as I can. Now, Mark Passio, sorry I'm butchering that, tends to be he's everyone's favorite modern anarchist to cite nowadays because he shines light on the origin of the language and its meaning. As anarchism, for some silly reason, just keeps getting a bad reputation. He does revive the utopian ideals, not the everything is chaos theory, but still it seems his regard to anarchy is much more in regard to anarchism. He says anarchy does not mean without rules. And this is a solid example. Depending who you talk to, anarchy may or may not have rules, according to the practitioner. But we know the truth that real anarchy isn't something practiced. It simply just is. It is something we experience, not create and possess. It's not a goal to achieve. It is our being, not our having. So we reviewed the definitions behind the word anarchy. So to make it clear that purely based on the etymology and definition, anarchy has no rules because it is the fruition, the result or state of being of no rules or rulers. Now look at the suffix y at the end of the word, the root word anarch, which defines a state of being. And then look at anarchism, which of course has rules because it is an ism, which insists on order, standards, doctrines, philosophies. The practice of these abstracts, they foster rules at their core, spoken or not. Anarchism, or any ism, is not a state of being. Ism is an organization, it's an authority. So, the fact that anarchy is defined generally and anarchism is so clearly defined as something definitive just shows that ism is made to restrict certain beliefs. And so the practitioner isn't really free to practice outside the rules or definition of anarchism. Or of course it wouldn't be anarchism and you'd be alienated, and that's not freedom, and that's certainly not anarchy. Anarchy, on the other hand, well, in my opinion, is being defined somewhat poorly by our so-called modern educators and scholars. It is defined in a general sense still. Anarchy does not say how to practice it. It does not give rules or orders, it just is. And can you see that? That's a big difference there. So, there is a lot of disagreement and argument in this area among anarchists and non-anarchists alike, but usually it's because they don't know what rules mean, or how rules fit under so many other words like doctrine, theory, system, ideals, religion. These are all abstracts and they are inherent rulers. These abstracts are required for anarchists and their anarchism, and perhaps that's just fine for some folks, and okay, you get no grief out of me, but let's call it for what it is. That's not possible in anarchy. It is important to really understand these words and how they affect us. Some of these are key words anarchists use to describe their belief systems, and many people tend to build their own definition based on their feelings, shaping the environment around what these words mean to them. The proof is in our everyday world, but I mean, crazy, right? And let's look at the definitions anyway. That's why we're doing this, right? So Webster defines rules as, a noun, not a verb, of course, and as a prescribed guide for conduct or action, the laws or regulations prescribed for the founder of a religious order for observance by its members, an accepted procedure, custom, or habit, a usually written order or direction made by a court regulating court practices or the action of parties, a legal precept or doctrine, a regulation or a bylaw governing procedure or controlling conduct. This one's interesting too. A usually valid generalization, a generally prevailing quality, state, or mode, a standard of judgment, a criterion, a regulating principle, a determinate method for performing a mathematical or operation and obtaining a certain result. It's a good one. The exercise of authority or control, dominion, a period during which a specified ruler or government exercises control. And Oxford defines rule as one of a set or explicit or understood regulations or principles governing conduct or procedure within a particular area of activity, a principle that operates within a particular sphere of knowledge, describing or prescribing what is possible or allowable, a code of practice and discipline for a religious order or community, control of or dominion over an area or people. The rule, the normal or customary state of things. Now you see that? There's a couple to talk about here, but you see that one? The customary state of things? Or in other words, the unspoken rule. Just think about that. And believe it or not, an unspoken rule is still a rule. And take note, Oxford and Webster's definitions for ism and rule, they're very similar. A little in definition, but nearly entirely in their nature. Now, the first definition for rule from Webster is all about rules, and they're specifically meant to control your thoughts and behaviors so you may function within that system. It's a pretty no-brainer. You have no innate authority here. And currently, that's the whole point of this conversation, which is that, anarchism has rules and anarchy does not. Now, teaching that the state of being is something that is being done, that's a false and dangerous idea that brings the state of being into ism, thus regulating the state of existence. Looking at Webster's second definition for rule, sometimes folks will argue part of this as tying anarchy and ism in together as one, claiming that a community that is generally having a valid experience is a state of being. Really, that is a state of having, and a state of being is not something you can have. It is a state by which you are in. Now, the mention of valid generalization is something known to the mathematical worlds and is otherwise known as rule generalization. This is a definition placed for mathematical context meant to apply restraints and boundaries based on generalized facts, and is technically just a theory. It is meant for math. It is not meant for the social, political, or philosophical discussion that we're having here now. Therefore, this definition is irrelevant in this context. Now also notice the rest of the second definition. It's all about rules and regulations. This form of state is being used like a verb, and often people mistake the state of being as being a verb. That's because that's what's being commonly taught, unfortunately. Now, we also find the word state in other definitions related to ism. So let's take a moment here and look at how the definitions so far include the words state and condition. It is important to consume these definitions in proper context and meaning. Now, I don't want to spend too much time here, but because so far we're already kind of dancing around all these lines and key reasons why people are misunderstanding this, I figured this is probably an area that is also going to need a little bit of clarity as well, because there's always going to be someone. So let's all be on the same page. So let's take a quick look. The only time you will see the word state and condition used to describe or define rules or ism, and it's not math, is when the health industry uses ism to define an abnormal, right, not naturally inflicted condition or disease, which is similar to the suffix osis or iasis, which except that ism is attached to commonly self-inflicted diseases, which stem from self-consumed isms. For example, alcoholism. It's a disease that begins in the mind. And if I'm wrong, then where is the ruler in this context? It's the disease itself. It is a man-made disease because the self-poisoning is a reflection or a manifestation of the person's internal thoughts and their suffering in ism form. Otherwise, I would say it is a problem to apply isms to the natural realm because natural phenomena are not man-made creations to be bound under the definitions or rules of ism. Now, it seems to me that they are only attaching ism to disease induced by ism, though I haven't looked too deep to be honest. Disease caused by excessive engagement with ism. So, because of Webster, Oxford, and now even medical dictionaries, which keep using the words state and condition when defining ism, it is now misunderstood that ism is a state of being. A state, condition, or state of condition are synonymous with each other, but they are completely different from a state of being. It seems common for folks to confuse the two as the same, or all of them for the same, but they're simply not. Now, scholars really dropped the ball here, and the response you will get from scholars varies depending on their level of consciousness. Some scholars, they would have you believe that the form of ism that is the condition is an objective fact, and that the state of being is something made up in your head because of that fact. In reality, a condition or a state of condition carries implication of a relationship to causes and circumstances. You can use this form of abstract to describe the physical, mental, or emotional action, movement, operation of something or someone. The amount of these variables may or may not influence your state of being, but it is not your state of being. They aren't the same. Your state of being may be described by someone's observing by listing conditions, but it's not a condition, nor a compilation of conditions. State is a general word with often no concrete implications or material relationships, quite the opposite of what condition does. So a state of being is the quality of your present experience. Your condition might influence that. It might not. Your state of being might also influence your condition. States of being are qualities. They're not actions. They're not things. They're not goals. While a state of being may appear subjective in the eyes of the observing collective, which currently is setting the rules, it is an objective fact to the individual that is actually experiencing it. Scholars overkill the meaning of state. It just simply means being. But we add to it because as humans, it just seems our minds are too busy to understand the state of anything without engaging with it. Therefore changing it with ideas and isms, and we lose it. Remember, ism brings the individual to the collective. So because ism requires regulatory acceptance, it plays a game that it is objective and anything outside of itself is subjective, turning you from reality into illusion. So it is really important to remember that abstracts aren't real, and it makes sense that abstracts or isms would do that. And it happens wherever isms are present. Unfortunately, some of these scholars are sneaky. They try to make a state of being, special verbs, abstract nouns, all sorts of different things. I suppose it's likely because they lack understanding and consciousness, and the best way they can do it is wrongfully. To correlate being in existence with abstracts, such as abstract nouns and verbs. The moment it is categorized, it stops, being a state of being, and it becomes the state of an abstract. The existence is the state of being alive or being real, and again, abstracts aren't real. They're just ideas. They say abstract nouns are the noun form of emotion adjectives. For example, happiness is the abstract noun form of the adjective happy. And do you see the fallacy here? Happiness is the abstract, but happy is not an adjective. It's a state of being. And by definition, cannot be an abstract. And sure, officially it's defined as an abstract. I see that. But clearly, happy's etymology shows us that it is the state of fortune that brings about the emotion of happiness. Hap is defined as fortune. Suffix y gives us the state of. So from a linguistic and philosophical point of view, the moment we aim for happiness, we lose sight of happy. We start fulfilling processes, rules, regiments, and whatever regulating tool your ism uses. Isms tell us that there is a way to happiness, but the truth is that happy is the way. It is even taught in many schools of thought that you must choose happy to be happy. Alignment, for manifestation. That's how that works. And so unfortunately, that's not being taught, not to the public. By accepting these abstracts as reality, we accept the physical as the definitive reality. It is blinding to the masses to what's actually real. Many of us know better, but it is a finely crafted illusion that has the majority under its spell. So now hopefully it's quite clear to everyone that the state of being is your present experience, unattached to opinions, observance, or thoughts of any kind. It just is. And because being happy is a state, it cannot be an achievement. It cannot be a goal. Therefore, a state of being can't be a condition, because a condition is defined by a process which indicates purpose and therefore a goal. Really think about that. Think about all of this right now, but think about it. Happy is not something you acquire, but it is something you can be. It shows us that no ism or system can ever produce a state of being. Now, getting back a little on track here, the state of being we're talking about is specifically anarchy, which has been mistaken for an abstract noun. And so maybe that's the problem, that we're confusing anarchy and anarchism for the same. Ism is an abstract, and abstracts are make-believe. Anarchy is not make-believe, nor is it a thing to obtain. It is a form of existence. It is a state of being. And despite what scholars might say about anarchy being an abstract noun, we all should know better now, right? So it's clear with etymology that a state of being cannot be an abstract. The suffix y on anarchy indicates that it's a state of being. The argument that a state of being is a noun is an argument that it somehow relies on the perversion that it's a condition. And while people tend to subjectively define and judge a state in accord of their own ideas and feelings to convey or describe a state or maybe implicate conditions, a state of being is not a condition, so it can't be a verb or a noun or any abstract. And it cannot be said enough. Abstracts don't exist, and the state of being means to exist. The main point to be made is that this version of state and condition is not the same as the state of being, and therefore we cannot relate anarchy with this form of state and condition. And if this is still difficult to understand and it requires another talk in the future, well, then so be it. I'll do that. It's, because to take that position in order to make the claim that anarchy can have rules is to make a very poor argument. It shows a lack of critical thinking and understanding. Now, I would also say that for anyone to make the claim that a system artificially organized under men is the same as a natural result from a natural environment or phenomena, that's a logical fallacy that will fail the test of logic every time. And unfortunately, it's an argument believed by the masses at large. And the damage, for example, is shown with the lie successfully selling Western medicine to the masses for a more power and control, and it's creating a larger divide between man and what we call God and nature, logic and truth. And here in particular, this ism is confusing the hell out of anarchists worldwide. Let's stay in context though. Anarchy is the state of being without rules and rulers. A state of being. So therefore, anarchy is being in a way that does not inhibit ism. This is not inherently good or bad, and yes, it could potentially unfold either way, based on your point of view or consciousness. So hopefully, we can see by definition that the presence of a rule, even if it's unspoken, would be contrary to the state of anarchy, but would not be for a system or a belief in anarchism. Anarchism, based purely on the definition and etymology, it requires some agreement on the rules, unspoken or not. And we can see it from its supporters that with anarchism, there's a baseline rule that must be met to live in an anarchist society. And that's why it's so important that we go over all these words so we can see these words that define each other and how they're a part of, the definitions and or further define authority and rules. When the big argument is about liberty and freedom, but you're bound by rules, right? So again, while anarchists claim that their beliefs will lead them to living without masters or rulers, it's actually clear that they do not only rely on the rules to get there, they also require them in their communities to function. Hence the ism. Now, history gives us several examples of so-called masterless societies. And regardless or not if that society holds the same values or principles, it's irrelevant. We should look at the entire picture and realize that a masterless society alone is not enough to avoid social disaster. Now, many anarchists, while trying to escape authority, can't escape their own doctrines, their beliefs and principles. And by definition, they're all authorities. And this tells them that an anarchist society requires a hive mind. And so that's an unspoken rule. Because those who follow ism require rules to satisfy the system, unspoken or not. Now, while some anarchists tend to deny this outright, they will usually follow up insisting that their society would rely on one or a set of principles, doctrines, theories, belief, practice, faith, politics, structures. I mean, all these things. And all these things they define and are defined by the word rule. And it's, friend, ism, and system. It's all the same. It's a back and forth thing of convenience, I noticed. It seems like as if folks, they know what they want, but they're just not sure how to get there. And because of that, what's justifiable becomes acceptable. Now, unfortunately, but as expected, to rely on abstracts or anything external of self to search for a life of anarchy externally, it will result in the same tyranny that you're trying to escape, which is ism. Ism becomes a real problem because it builds walls in between what is naturally or objectively acceptable and ourselves, and what we personally find acceptable, in an environment that tells us what is acceptable. So anarchists from different peer groups tend to not agree on particular topics. Having communal rules is one of them, actually. And it's in my opinion that normally the less educated anarchist groups are usually the ones calling for the no-rule society. And I find it particularly silly for an anarchist advocate because, if you can't tell yet, they're calling for a no-rules implementation through a non-spoken system or a set of rules. It's all very ignorant and very dangerous. And not because of the lack of rules, obviously, but because of ism, which is hiding the rules. Never mind the other several everyday issues, there's a lot of big issues here worth talking about. And so many anarchists, they can't agree on anything socially buzzwords. I mean, all these big topics, right? I've actually had discussion many times with these advocates that they believe that if everyone did not infringe on their rights, then everything would be good enough. And it was just simple, just stay in your bubble. That this principle alone, the sole solution, peace for everyone. Now, I could be wrong, but I'm sure that's how the United States of America came under the Constitution. And yet, because of ism, look where that's gotten things. Trying to place freedom into something called a republic was quickly poisoned into a democracy, which has become a soft version of socialism. And with each downgrade of government, the rules, they take more and more freedoms and isms. The belief in security over freedom, removing the individual and his personals, making him public property, a general display and subject to his neighbors. And hey, maybe that would get somewhere if everyone thought exactly the same. Another popular idea is that it would be social justice for anyone who broke the unspoken rules. Good God, could you imagine? Looking at today's society, it's very much lacking consciousness. Trying to figure out the rules that are unspoken so you don't get hung in the square by your neighbor. I've conversed with many of them about where the lines are, and oh boy, nobody can agree on any important issues, especially those that arise specifically from exercising freedoms, whether or not they're legitimate. And, for example, there are no standards or agreements on what defines abortion among anarchists, or what murder is, or what's defined as child abuse. And where should the community draw the line with moral standards, if at all? Nobody can answer these questions the same. So when questioned about these issues, anarchists, just like anyone, will just recite their isms. They just parrots, right? So for many conscious individual with some spiritual standing, we would have no problem having these conversations with our fellow brethren. But for many people lacking consciousness, these seem to be very trivial, very hard to define areas, and it makes them feel uncomfortable, upset when you even bring it up. How you going to live in a society like that? We're crumbling as it is. And I've been told by anarchists, supported by his peers in this group that were also, in the discussion, in and out, that any form of discipline on a child, anything that would essentially make the child unhappy in that moment, would be a form of abuse. And if I were to spank a child and if he heard it passing by, he would come onto my private property, kick down my door, and shoot me dead to liberate the child from the abuse. A child that he admitted he would not care for afterwards, and someone else in the community or the family, maybe unrelated, maybe not, they would be forced to take on the child due to the unspoken rules of their society. And if they didn't, what if you didn't? What if I don't want the child? What's going to happen to you? And then for what? All of this because what? Yelling or spanking is a violation of life? No, it's not. It's not a violation of life. Not exactly. And yes, obviously, it's not a great way to respond to one another or live, right? For you or your child, it's poisonous. There are curable underlying isms that allow this behavior, which could be addressed. So we should do that. Regardless, for a parent disciplining their child poorly or superbly, to be shot and hung for it without sensible recourse or a fair standard of trial or at least a chance to defend oneself, that's as inhumane as it gets. It's a basic human, authority innate in each of us to at least defend ourselves, to defend the truth and our beliefs. Yet because of this individual's ignorance, his resort to violence doesn't treat the actual issue. He had explained to me that if the parents were to fight back, he might even rally up the neighbors to help him. It's crazy. So now, I'm wondering what happens to the neighbors if they don't want to join in. Will the neighbors be in trouble for not joining in? Meanwhile, this same person, later on in this very long, drawn-out discussion, he explained that abortions are perfectly acceptable, and to intervene would be a trespass on their rights, punishable by death as well. Now, hopefully everyone can see the very contradictory and ignorant, the ignorance of all of that. It's just crazy. And no, of course not every anarchist are this ignorant. But the point is, simply not having a government to tell you how to live is not going to magically bring about your happiness. Just because there is no king or president issuing orders, this freedom of masters is nothing more than the opportunity to secure your anarchy. But it is not it's not guaranteed without doing your duty first. And while it scares most people, being accountable and doing your duty to self and community, to family, the opportunity to do your duty to secure your inherent rights by use of your innate authority, that's just the first step in truly being free. It's not the last. Now, with the common or average anarchist preventing such an unstable environment, is it really any wonder why people don't want to live an anarchism lifestyle? I mean, all this craziness I'm talking about, if you really investigate, you're going to find the same thing. So this is the general logic of the new and improved modern anarchist of today. And the fact that many will disagree with this practice as I've described it is proof of a society formed by rules that can't be talked about because they didn't technically exist. Just will not work like that. Can't talk about anything if they don't exist, huh? So not even close. And so, to be clear, it does depend on who you talk to. Moving on. Now, anarchist is defined by Webster as a person who rebels against any authority, established order, or ruling power, a person who believes in, advocates, or promotes anarchism or anarchy. Well, we know that's not true, but let's continue. Oxford defines anarchist as a noun, a person who believes in or tries to bring about anarchy. Again, wrong, but the origin is mid-17th century from Greek anarchos, meaning without a chief. We went over that. French anarchiste, butchering next, I'm not French, thank you. Adjective, it's an adjective relative to or supporting anarchy or anarchist. There's a lot of half-truths there. So Webster defines ist as one that performs a specified action. One that adheres or advocates to a specified doctrine or a system or code of behavior. Now, Oxford defines ist as a follower or of a distinctive practice or system or philosophy, typically a political ideology or an artistic movement. And their example is you can't be born an ist. Exactly. So with all this fresh on the brain now, I hope that it's super clear that anarchy is a state of being. And because of this, it cannot be performed, practiced, or obtained. You cannot live with accepted masters, or use principles or rules and still experience anarchy in any manner. There are some anarchists who will explain that even if they're living in an oppressive environment in their mind, they feel free and they have freed themselves mentally, and therefore they are living in anarchy. This is basically gender dysphoria. A person aligning their identity with their feelings despite the evidence contrary around them. These feelings are formulated abstracts based on beliefs formulated around biological sensations. In reality, you are being oppressed, and your ability to work through that mentally doesn't change that. Your feeling of being free is merely a feeling. Opinions, abstracts on paper, exhibiting your denial of facts. That's not anarchy. In fact, you have oppressed your own mind in this way. And while it is far more attractive when it's referred to in a context of a utopian society, anarchy is just simply without rules. And that doesn't guarantee the negative or the positive outcome. In fact, the very nature of anarchy insists on more authority and responsibility for the individual, not over. And lately, it seems that people don't like that. Regardless, it is the state of not being ruled, the lack of authority over you. Nothing more. So, wow. That's a lot. And it's about this time, the brain starts to melt. We just went over a ton of information. So let's do a quick recap based solely on what we just discussed. On the side of definitions we just spoke of, assuming we all agree on the facts, we know that anarchy is a or the state of being, as I've just described. And I'll go over this more and more, specifically with the suffix y here in a moment. Suffix ist is a suffix that defines a practice or system or philosophy, one that performs a specified action. And by taking the suffix ist and adding this to a word, you have changed the word to describe a person who performs or practices a system of beliefs or principles, etc. So using ist, is forming personal nouns and related adjectives denoting an adherent of a system of beliefs, principles, etc. expressed by nouns ending in ism, right? So now suffix ism, which are a distinctive doctrine, cause, theory, act, practice, process, religion, the adherence to a system or a class of principles or a distinctive philosophy, typically a political ideology or an artistic movement. But only added to the end of a noun, so a word with an ism suffix is also always a noun, so a tangible physical thing, right? And so anarchism is formulated by the English language in a somewhat logical way, though lately anarchists have changed the way the English language works, creating new ways to practice, and now, so far, we've seen a blurred and distorted etymology and therefore some confusion of what words mean. And so, because of this, that's why we're taking all this time, taking the opportunity to go over all these things. So, I'm sorry. Thank you for following along. Please follow me a little further. I want to take just a moment to explain the rules for prefix and suffix in the English language. Now, people argue this, and ism is important to the other videos and talks we're doing. So let's take a look at ism. Now, ism is suffix forming nouns of action and doctrine. Ism comes from French isme, or directly from Latin isma or ismus, from Greek isma, from the stem of verbs and eisen. The rules are using ism at the end of a word suggests that the word is related to a belief or a system of beliefs, accepted as authority by a group or a school of thought. Ism means doctrine, means system, manner, act, characteristic. It has the quality of enlargement, so it carries the individual to the mass. So, for example, a being in anarchy is a free individual being free. He likes this, and so he develops abstracts around his lifestyle to keep that state of being going on. He is the individual anarchist, and the belief grows to a general doctrine to encompass the general masses. Specific personal ideas become general impersonal ideas to connect with others. To be a good anarchist, you must practice the general idea of anarchism, even if you don't agree with it. You must stop identifying with your own personal ideas and align with the general picture, or you're not really following the rules of anarchism. Thus, anarchism is a belief system that takes the individual from himself to the group, to the mass. It removes his identity. Anarchism is not being defined as to correlate to what is, the state of being, like anarchy. And whatever anarchy is, it is by definition, it has nothing to do with ism of any kind, despite the nonsense scholars are standing behind and publishing. Now, we just need to use our skills and read and understand. So anarchism solely based on the rules of the English language and the defined standards for root words, suffix, prefix, and how they're applied, it's defined like this. Webster defines anarchism a belief that government and laws are not necessary. And Oxford defines anarchism as a belief in the abolition of all government and the organization of society on a voluntary cooperative basis without the recourse to force or compulsion. Now take note that, both of these are defined as beliefs or belief systems, and therefore the ism. Because belief systems require rules. It would be hard to believe that there would be no recourse to force or compulsion. Come on, otherwise, how are the unspoken rules upheld? Rules are always enforced through force. Rules are always enforced through force, even if it is passive aggressive. Now, let us not forget to look at the suffix y. Let's go away for a minute, because a definitive way we know anarchy is not a noun or an ism is the suffix y. The suffix y, which is a suffix of various origins used in the formation of what's being called action nouns from verbs, also found in other abstract nouns. We argued this a little bit earlier, how a state of being is being confused as an abstract noun, which is an oxymoron. Anarchy is a state of being without rules or ism. Prefix an is a state, and suffix y is a state of being. But the root word arc is abstract. So we take the word part from arc, from arcos, and apply the negative and then we have anarch, or no rule. And then we add y to define the state of no rule. So then we have anarchy, the state of no rules or ruler. So it's taking an abstract, anarch, no rule or ruler, to the state of no rule or ruler. So now if we remove the state of, the suffix y, and apply the person who practices, the suffix ist, then we have anarchist, the practitioner of no rule or ruler. If we remove the person who practices, the suffix ist, and apply the belief system, principle, doctrine, etc., then we have the suffix ism. Then you have anarchism, the beliefs, philosophies, doctrines, etc. of no rule or ruler. This is exactly how the English language works, and so we can properly express these workings as anarchism, a belief that government and laws are not necessary or don't exist, because ism is a suffix, and this is how it is applied to the root word. I'm sorry, I know it's painful. Because on the other hand, when engaging with anarchists in these couple of decades or so, the response seems to be that anarchists have philosophies that have altered the rules or the meaning of anarchism, resulting in a change to what it means to be an anarchist. All just to suit the modern idea that a state of being is an abstract. This blurring the truth of things, hiding the truth of anarchy. Something very powerful you need. These minuscule, tiny little hidden fallacies within the English language, which has grown into massive control over the psyche, can be exposed and removed, but we have to do the reading and the critical thinking first. Now, the logic that is being used is a poisonous backwards logic, which undermines the English language rules and etymology of the words being used. Words are powerful, and we have a great effect on our realities. To distort these words, practices, and meanings is to distort the truth. And while it may seem insignificant, but it is a slow erosion of the truth. And unless it's stopped, it has only but one ending. Now, these anarchists express the abstract idea or belief of no beliefs in rules or rulers. Perhaps that might sound okay to you, but it's not proper. It's not proper English. It's not proper anarchism. Let's take a quick look. Because we can begin to erode the propaganda people are accepting as truth when we pick at these little fallacies. Now, often these modern day anarchists, they'll argue that anarchy is what they do, what they practice, and that using principles or doctrine, ideologies, or whatever beliefs is acceptable, and that it somehow doesn't take from the integrity of what they're attempting, because their beliefs is to practice non-beliefs of a non-practice, a belief of no belief in rules. So we just we end up with a jumbled mess of ideologies. And so if we took the new practice and beliefs from our modern day anarchists and exhibited it in a word form, their behaviors might look like this, right? Anarchism, a belief of no belief in rules or rulers. Typically, the practitioner uses rules, usually unspoken, to instill their philosophy or doctrine, which is simply that they practice a discriminatory belief of the belief in rulers. And remember, beliefs are a kind of rulers. Anarchism, defined by some anarchists, is the ideology, belief, theory that is an oppressive and especially discriminatory attitude or belief toward this made-up word archism. Does that make sense? Think about that. Run that back. Now, if the word arc doesn't exist, now the word arc does exist, but if we humor the word archism as literal, then anarchism is the oppressive and especially discriminatory attitude or belief towards archism, or the belief in something that has a curved shape, which is kind of silly. So, let's actually humor the definition of what they're trying to make from the new words, which would define an oppressive or especially discriminatory attitude or belief towards oppressive and especially discriminatory attitudes or beliefs. Don't be confused, because we can see arc is an adjective form. So using arc to describe the ruler, but it is not as a noun, nor is it being an actual rule or ruler. It's just a description. And in some cases, so strong that arc can be a prefix. And remember, prefixes can only be added to pre-existing words. They aren't words on their own. And where it confuses people most is where it can be used to combine with other nouns to describe the nature or the state of that noun. For example, words like hierarchy. The arc part of the word defines a type of rule, but again, standing on its own, it's not a noun. It's not even a thing. At least it's not a thing that rules, nor without further formulation anyway. So to be clear, there is no such thing as archism in a political, philosophical, or anything sense. It is not even found in any official book that sets the standards. So I know that because of the etymology, we really want to say that archism is the belief of in rulership. Unfortunately, it just doesn't work that way. There's no such word. Archism simply wasn't formulated that way. And archon is the root word and has already been transformed. There's no other word to add a suffix to in order to make this a belief, principle, doctrine, rule, rulership, faith, whatever. And so, as we know, to attach the ism to the existing word anarch is proper and would become anarchism by language rules. Otherwise, there's a little bit of esoteric knowledge behind the word arc and in its relations to L from electricity, referencing our electric universe, knowing that electricity is a plasmic force, that is the harmonic frequency, that the frequency is the spirit of God that gave us the elect, and so forth. It's all very interesting to think about, considering that archon is an old Gnostic term for the rulers of this realm, which was thought out to be the so-called fallen angels. So indeed, what I've been shown by the Spirit and have come to fully understand is that ism is the abstract form of the beast system, the ruler of this realm indeed. It is the personified form. And back in Athens, it was also a term for a Greek magistrate, or according to Britannica, archon. In ancient Greece was the chief magistrate or magistrates in many city-states. The office became prominent in the archaic period when, the kings were being superseded by the aristocrats. Anyway, before we go way completely off the rails here, let's bring it back. The proper way in how anarchists are wanting to express themselves and how the word is properly formulated looks more like this. Anarchism, the belief in no rules or rulers. And hey, say what you will, but grammar matters. The way we comprehend foundational information at our core beliefs matter. Word formation and etymology matters. Resonant frequency matters. And using words to describe our beliefs is dishonest and misleading if we aren't doing it properly, intentional or not. So, since there's no such thing as archism in this context, you cannot build on it with a prefix to change it to anarchism. Instead, how it works is we added ism to the word anarch, which is a real word, formulated properly. According to Webster, anarch is defined as a noun, a leader or advocate of revolt or anarchy. You cannot add a prefix or suffixes to a word that doesn't exist unless we agree it's a made-up word and we just, we both give our defined weight to it. Until then, you cannot force your made-up words, feelings, or definitions on society at large and expect people to fall in line with that. This is the behavior of the new modern anarchists and apparently many new activists. A slight misconception like this can have a great effects on our psyche and thus our whole reality. The power of words, vibrations, sounds, frequency all has such a grand effect on our experiences. And it is not that anarchists today are presenting their argument on paper or some computer chat broken down the way I'm presenting it. in order to contrast semantics, but what I'm saying is that they tend to have this attitude overall, socially. And I think it's interesting how their ism is manifesting as a reflection in the semantics of these areas of linguistics and philology. Now, we can see what they should represent versus what they actually represent. And regardless, either way one chooses to consume this, ism has nothing to do with anarchy, either way. But still, we stopped here because of resonance, right? And our psyche. Our subconscious takes this in. There's a big difference in having a belief of no belief in rulers, how it unfolds in our lives and how our thoughts and actions, versus a belief in having no rules and rulers, which is very different. And when done properly, it would express a hyper sense of rules and revolt, perhaps with there being an implement standard of lifestyle that avoids rules in life. But a free-spirited person who is only adhering to their personal rules founded on core beliefs is still ism. But even though, I would rather, one is more honest than the other, basically, and I would rather avoid ism altogether. But if I had to choose, I would rather deal with an honest person than a delusional person. Now, to have a belief of no belief in rulers is choosing to be blind to the rules you don't like and denying or justifying the existence of rules you do like. And that's funny because this is what we see at face value and how it's being acted out socially by many of the modern anarchists. So, perhaps anarchists just forgot or just ignore that beliefs, when properly defined, are rules and boundaries that mold one's character and life. It is something that has authority over you whether you've chosen it or not. In my opinion, it seems people are making up words from, their feelings from a lack of understanding about the etymology of these terms, or how they work. They're allowing isms to build moral standards for them. This might be good enough for some, still, but there's no denying that these are still rules. They bind you, and they bind you in ways that affect the way you think and act from moment to moment. It's a programming. This is why people are so unconscious, I think, hey, to each their own. Do what you do. I have no problem with what people do, as long as you don't hurt someone else. But let's keep it real. This can't technically, by definition and etymology, be the same thing as anarchy, because anarchy is free of all rulers in all forms. So for good measure, when I look, according to Merriam-Webster, the next closest word to archaism is archaism. Obviously, it's a completely different type of word. The definition of archaism, even in much earlier times, has always been, something old or no longer used. So I think we've cleared all of it, right? I think. Let's see. Right. And we established that there's no archism. So we know that's not a real word. People are building their psyche off this. Anarchism. It's not, at least not in the formation or content what they're trying to use it in. So if we accept this make-believe word formation based on these uses, it would make no difference, because you still can't have anarchism of any kind under any perception or personal understanding and also have an experience of an anti-ruler, because the ism itself is your ruler, whether you see it or not. And so some more fun facts. The prefix "and" can also mean, usually it means additional. And so anarchy is or can be a semantic nightmare, depending who we talk to. I will still humor the path that we are already on, so let's just leave it at that given the context. The usage of root words and the rules of the English language, they're pretty clear. And, to use the word anarchism expressed as anarchism it's not existent. It never has been done until recently, when folks are trying to redefine their beliefs as non-beliefs, which is weird. And it's not an official or proper use of the prefix. The idea and exhibited behaviors are irrelevant to the state of anarchy. All the way around. Anarchist problems don't really lie in these shallow technicalities, but in my opinion, it seems that the modern brand of anarchism is quite self-destructive and contrary to its true nature. Though we should note the fallacy within the etymology. So that's why we're here, because it does technically dissolve the argument that anarchy and anarchism are of the same tree. They aren't. Socially, what anarchists are describing is not anarchy. Hell, it's barely anarchism. And it's moving from more of a socialist movement to a communist movement. Anarchism is an authority figure. So now let me sum this up a bit on semantics. I do want to go with a few more definitions here, and then I want to really move on to the history and philosophy, the fun facts. But let me beat this topic to death. So far we know this. Anarchy is a or the state of being. Ist is a practice, system, or philosophy, also one that performs a specified action. Isms are a distinctive doctrine, cause, theory, act, process, religion, or adherence to a system or a class of principles, or a distinctive philosophy. Philosophy, typically a political ideology or an artistic movement. According to what seems like apparently confused scholars, anarchist is a person who practices or promotes the state of anarchy, supposedly, right? Or more accurately, who engages in anarchism, because based on what we know, you can't really do both at the same time. Now, can you? Not by definition. Anarchism, according to the proper rules and definitions given by official standards, is the belief, theory, and or philosophy in the abolishment of government and laws and organized society by the use of abstract beliefs which require a set of unspoken rules, principles, doctrines, and or standard of practice. But modern anarchism, whose anarchists preach anarchism, have slightly skewed what anarchism was and now claim it is anti-archism. Anti-archism, right? And they make the claim that their way is simply anti-belief of in rules or rulers, and to accomplish a like-minded society, you are required to share the communal principle ideologies that would be instilled on a voluntary cooperative basis without recourse to force or compulsion. Thus, anarchism is free somehow. It is very clearly a fallacy, a lie, which is easily addressed, as we have, if we understand the English standards and we respect it and all the rules, and we ask, can anarchy be practiced? Is there a philosophy, principle, theory, or ideology behind anarchy? Now, knowing that anarchy can't have rules, philosophy, principle, theory, doctrine, or ideology, because these are all the things that create rules, the answer is no, right? So, to address their uses of anarchism, or its proper form, anarchism, I'd ask the same question. You can't have principles, philosophies, theories, doctrines, or ideologies that are anti-rule, and then bring about anarchy, because this would mean you have rules that are anti-rule. So the answers are obvious. No. Anarchy cannot be practiced. And regardless if you accept anarchism or anarchism, every single definition under anarchism and anarchist would insist on being ruled under a type of abstract. Anarchists are actively using rules to promote and a rules-based collaboration, to be anti-rule. My mind's going numb here. Anarchism, defined by the dictionary, openly admits it is a system of beliefs, a system, which we know requires the individual to sacrifice individual self for the betterment of the whole under a rules-based organization so the ism can, function. That's not anarchy. Not even close. And that's because, that's what words mean. That's how we use them. Otherwise, put simply, if you have a belief, theory, principle, doctrine, attitude that is anti-ruler, then by standards you have an ism. Or in other words, you still have a ruler. There. I think the horse is dead now. I've repeated myself a few times, I think, but there it is. So before I wrap this first part of the talk up, in the spirit of this talk, I want to touch on the word theory. It has been mentioned a lot, and while I'm sure we've all got it by now, I know, let me point out the authority group of words that define theory, so that everyone may understand that theory is something that gives you, or rather, theory is something that you give authority to, and it does rule you. Now, Webster defines theory as a plausible or scientifically acceptable general principle or body of principles offered to explain phenomena, a belief, policy, or procedure proposed or followed as the basis of action, an ideal or hypothetical set of facts, principles, or circumstances often used in the phrase theory. A hypothesis assumed for the sake of argument or investigation, an unapproved assumption, conjecture, a body of theorems presenting a concise systematic view of a subject, the general or abstract principles of a body of fact, a science, or an art, abstract thought, speculation, the analysis of a set of facts and their relation to one another. There are several words worth noticing here and realizing that they are words of authority, all of them, damn near all of them. And the very embodiment of so much rule comes in the form of these words and their abstracts. So let us notice the word abstract within this definition. Now, if you caught my talk on racism, we know that it's usually not a good thing to identify with abstracts, and because it's a sickness. And if you didn't catch that one, well, I definitely recommend you check that out, and hopefully that's thought-provoking enough for yourself. So it's also a much shorter one than this one. Now, anyway, Oxford defines theory as a supposition or a system of ideas intended to explain something, especially one based on general principles independent of the thing to be explained. A set of principles on which the practice of an activity is based. An idea used to account for a situation or justify a course of action. We keep seeing religion pop up in a few of these definitions too, and since the start. So let's take a look at that real quick. Webster defines religion as an archaic, scrupulous conformity, consensuous, a cause, principle, or system of beliefs held with ardor and faith. Oxford defines religion as a pursuit or interest followed with a great devotion. Middle English, originally in the sense of life under monastic vows, from Old French or Latin, or from the Latin word religion, which is obligation, bond, reverence, perhaps based on the Latin religere, which means to bind. So very easily in the word religion, we can see the bondage and authority and rulership that's immediately placed over you. Religions exercise many tools of rulership, including their use of practicing faith. Oxford defines faith as complete trust or confidence in something or someone, or something. A strong belief in the doctrines of a religion based on the spiritual conviction rather than proof. A particular religion, a strongly held belief. Webster defines faith as an allegiance to duty or a person, loyalty, fidelity to one's promises, sincerity of intentions, belief in trust in and loyalty to God, belief in traditional doctrines of a religion, firm belief in something for which there is no proof, complete trust, something that is believed especially with strong conviction, a system of religious beliefs on faith without question. Transitive verb, right? It's a transitive verb, it's archaic, believe, trust, this sort of thing. So notice that believe and trust are synonymous, and they are things that are required to be a part of an ism. Now, I'm not a huge fan of the church's position on faith, as if it is the first and last stop when engaging with God, when really there's so much more. Faith is a stepping stone in the right direction, a step towards the truth, but what the goal should be is to move past the faith, right? Develop a definite relationship with the Spirit and progress with the Spirit. Otherwise, you start becoming stagnant in spirit, and spirituality becomes a chore. It becomes routine work, and to become stagnant with your faith tends to be a dirty thing. We should start with faith and quickly move into, to knowing, so then we can act with absolute conviction. Faith is as strong as its holder, and it will eventually break if you are not giving yourself. Knowing is the ultimate conviction. The church keeps you in a state of faith, never able to progress towards the fullness of the Spirit. Sadly, all systems in any field in our society tend to act this way. They're systems, it's ism. They're built off truths, and they turn around and preach half-truths, which tends to stick you stagnant so you can never fulfill your greatest potential. Anyway, these forms of isms, theories, religions, and faith are things generally ruled by types of doctrines. And, of course, Webster defines doctrine as a principle, a position, or the body of principles in a branch of knowledge or a system of belief. A dogma. A statement of fundamental government policy, especially in international relations. Law, a principle of law established through past decisions. A military principle or set of strategies, something that is taught, archaic, teaching, instruction. So, they're not natural, it's something taught. Oxford defines doctrine as a belief or set of beliefs held and taught by a church, political party, or other group. U.S., a stated principle of government policy, mainly in foreign or military affairs. Dogma defined by Webster is something held as an established opinion, especially a definitive authoritative tenet, a code of such tenets, a point of view or tenet put forth as an authoritative without adequate grounds, A doctrine, a body of doctrines concerning faith or morals formally stated and authoritatively proclaimed by a church. Now, Oxford defines dogma as a principle or a set of principles laid down by an authority as incontrovertibly true. The dogmas of faith. Webster defines principle. Doesn't sound too bad. Good principles, right? People talk about these things all the time. It's a comprehensive and fundamental law, doctrine, or assumption, a rule or code of conduct, habitual, devotion to right principles. The laws or facts of nature underlining the works of an artificial device, a primary source, origin, an underlining faculty or endowment. And so now Oxford defines principle as a fundamental truth or proposition that serves as the foundation for a system or belief or behavior or for a chain of reasoning. Usually principles, a rule or belief governing one's behavior. Mass noun morally correct behavior and attitude. A general scientific theorem or law that has numerous special applications across a wide field. A natural law forming the basis for the construction or working of a machine. A fundamental source or basis of something. A fundamental quality determining the nature of something. Now, Webster defines practice as carrying out, apply, to do or perform often, customarily, or habitually. To be professionally engaged in, to perform or work repeatedly so to become proficient, to train by repeated exercises, practice, pupils, and penmanship. Obsolete, plot. To do repeated exercise for proficiency. To pursue a proficient actively, archaic, intrigue, to do something customarily. Oxford defines practice as the actual application or use of an idea, belief, or method as opposed to theories relating to it. To carry out an exercise or a profession, especially that of a doctor or a lawyer. Count on the businesses or premises of a doctor or a lawyer. The customary, habitual, or expected procedure or way of doing something. An established method of legal procedure. Repeated exercise and performance of an activity or skill as to acquire, maintain proficiency in it. So, if anarchy has a doctrine or principles, it's literally defined as having laws. If you recall, anarchism has also been defined as a political ideologies, and because this is its history as documented, which we're going to get into in part 2. So let's take a look real quick though, because anarchists have fallen so far from their roots. Now, when it comes to freedom, this may not be necessary, but let's take a look anyways. Webster defines political as of or relating to government and or government or the conduct of government, of relating to or concerned with the making as distinguished from the administration of governmental policy, of relating to, involving or involved in politics, especially party politics, organizing governmental terms, involving or charged or concerned with acts against a government or a political system. Now, Oxford defines political as relating to the government or public affairs of a country, relating to the ideas or strategies of a particular party or group in politics, interested in or active in politics, motivated by a person's beliefs or actions concerning politics, derogatory, done or acting in the interest of status or power within the organization rather as a matter of principle. I believe one of the most important things to realize is the definition of ism. Definition standards call an ism a lot of things, and ism is defined as a system among other things that also requires a system or to be organized. Now, I did define a system earlier under Webster, but let us refresh our minds with the oppressive definition from Webster. Now, Webster defines system as a regularly interacting or interdependent group of items forming a unified whole, such as a group of interacting bodies under the influence of related forces, an assemblage of a substance that is in or tends to equilibrium, right? It's a regulation for balance, a group of body organs that together perform one or more vital functions. A little more anatomy, but the body considered as a functional unit, right? Unit, a group of related natural objects or forces, a group of devices or artificial objects, or an organization forming a network especially for distributing something or serving a common purpose. A major division of rocks, usually larger than a series, including all forms during a period of an era. Obviously not in context. So a form of social, economic, or political organization or practice. An organized set of doctrine, ideas, or principles usually intended to explain the arrangement or workings of a systematic whole. An organized or established procedure, a manner of classifying, symbolizing, or schematizing harmonious arrangements or pattern, order. An organized society or social situation regarded as stultifying or oppressive. An establishment. It's usually used with the establishment, right? Now, Webster's Kids definition of system defines it as an orderly way of managing, controlling, organizing, or doing something. Oxford defines system as a set of things working together as part of a mechanism or an interconnecting network, a complex whole. Physiology, a set of organs in a body, right? When it comes to that, a common structure or function, the human or animal body as a whole. Computing, a group of related hardware units or programs or both, especially when dedicated to a single application. It's also geology in chronostratigraphy, whatever. A major range of strata that corresponds to a period in time, divided into a series. Astronomy, a group of celestial objects connected by their mutual attractive forces, especially moving in orbits about a center. A set of principles or procedures according to which something is done. An organized scheme or method. A set of rules used in measurement or classification. Noun, as a mass noun, organized planning or behavior. Orderliness. A method of choosing one's procedure in gambling. The system, right? The prevailing political or social order, especially when regarded as an oppressive or intransigent. Man, I'm just butchering words today. So let's step back and take a look at what we have so far. Anarchy is the state of being that is not fueled by ideas and is not supported through campaign or awareness. It is not brought about by systems, methods, theories, or philosophies. It's not a principle or founded on principle. It's not even a thought. This is the hardest truth for today's anarchists to understand, or anyone really. Anarchy is free of rule, free of systems, free of methods, free of philosophies, ideals, doctrines, all of that. And these philosophies, ideals, doctrines, and principles, these are all things which incorporate the rule. So, anarchy is a state of existence, being without these things, as I've already shown thoroughly with the English language standards. Now, what does this all mean? How can we exist in anarchy? Anarchy is the effects or the fruits or, being without ism. A way that can't be defined but can be experienced objectively from a position of self-harmony with universal consciousness and the environment, which is self, on every level. Also in harmony with this fellow man, which is also yourself. It requires a harmonic presence, which is long gone from society today. I don't mean this stereotypical, hippie tree hugging either. Now, anarchists want to bring about society, but through systems, methods, and principles, doctrines, etc. And like all other systems, methods, and principles and doctrines, it will fail. It will be met with rebellion and when man's, spirit is ready to grow. These boundaries are too small. Unlike anarchy, which is not a system, nor can it ever be achieved through a system, to do so would be forceful, directly or indirectly. That's not anarchy. People should understand these English language truths, as well as the philosophies I'm about to get into in the second part of this talk. If not just to be a little more educated in your ideals and what you believe and think, but also something to think about for those who are interested in living with anarchy or just looking to do better or understanding why you feel so oppressed. Which community would you rather live in? In an anarchist society ruled by anarchism with rules, doctrines, and principles based on theories and ideals, with the majority rule, essentially sacrificing a level of freedom for the security of the organization. Or are you a person who is more of a natural type, looking to harmonize with your environment, to find your flow and go, to live and let live according to natural truths, to draw yourself closer to the spirit and to what we call God? Because it's so very important on, how words are utilized and understood by folks who are interested in what I'm doing. Because for me, I'm developing a community, looking for this natural environment, looking for this natural alignment with that environment, and to one day experience and live in a total anarchy. To be clear, it's not something under anarchism, and I'm not doing this for anarchists. Now, perhaps there's a deeper meaning to these words, and I don't know. I'm just giving you what I know from my conscious level and what they mean, from where they come from and how they actually apply. And perhaps, something that is I think is being hidden from everybody, and it's hiding bigger truths. But either way, I've talked plenty on the philology of anarchism for the sake of understanding ism and exposing the trick they play in language, which is undoubtedly is blinding the masses of their true identity. Now, if you've made it this far, man, I appreciate your diligence. Thank you for making it this far. Thank you for listening to what I have to say, and I invite you for the second part of this talk, where we take the knowledge we gained here and look at the social history of anarchism, so we can see that anarchism is an authoritative political ideology and a borderline religion. We solidify that anarchy and anarchism was understood as separate by the men who shined light on anarchy and gave anarchism to the world at the very start. Join me. For now, stay conscious, stay blessed, and God bless. Hello and good day, brothers and sisters. We're back here for part 2, and we're back here on the homestead, on the family's property, and it's a much nicer day today, not as dreary as it was yesterday. Took a break on that. It was a long piece, so we recorded the second part today. Much nicer out, much warmer out. Blessing to be in the trailer again. We're going to do that today, but we'll catch you out next time on the next video outside. Got a couple nice places lined up, so very beautiful. All right, coming back to this part 2. Well, first of all, if you didn't watch part 1 of this talk on anarchy, not anarchism, I strongly recommend you check it out. It's a super exciting video, full of etymology, right? Despite the dry talk, though, on definition, it's very informative, hopefully. Much of what's being talked about is actually uncommon information for most people, considering that, most people believe that anarchy and anarchism are the same thing, and anarchism is a state of chaos without government rule. In reality, we found out that anarchy is the state of being, and anarchism is a discriminative and oppressive political ideology. Now, let us observe the truth in history without all the semantics, right? In the very beginning, there was men who have set the standards for anarchists and a lot of other groups. But they didn't want to be recognized with any of those groups, especially anarchists. They say, for example, that Pierre Joseph Proudhon, the so-called father of anarchy by the continental anarchists, say he was the first to proclaim himself as an anarchist. But in reality, the media labeled him by a twist of words. He didn't want the label of ism. And if we read in between the lines carefully, it becomes quite obvious. Britannica states that Proudhon was a complex writer who remained abstinently independent, refusing to consider himself the founder of either a system or a party. And yet, he was regarded by Bakunin, Peter Kropotkin, and other leaders of organized anarchism as their philosophical ancestor. So clearly, these guys were inspired by Proudhon, but I would like to think that his ideals are clear to anyone who has actually read his work. He seems quite intelligent. He recognized that the laws of society have no natural connection, and that when these unnatural laws are finally replaced with natural laws through social evolution, we can then have a natural social order. Not that we need to replace the laws with natural laws to have social order. Please consume that carefully, because there's a difference there in what I said. It's a difference between anarchism and anarchy. Because, no, you can't achieve anarchy through systems or isms. It is a state of being, not the product of a machine. Proudhon's views have inspired several different isms, and anarchism is just one of them. Now, communists and socialists have also celebrated him. His write-up, The Philosophy of Poverty, made him one of the top socialist figureheads. He was even commonly associated with Karl Marx and Mikhail Bakunin. I'm probably butchering some of these names, excuse me. He inspired the federal principle, the political capability of the working class. Many groups over time tried to claim Proudhon and his ideals despite his claims and requests not to be labeled. Still, many groups like anarchists have claimed his views, and sadly, only to politicize them. Now, before the 18th century, anarchy was a pure thing that had no labels or systems, yet the promises of such realizations had drawn dozens of different anarchist spin-offs all over the world. Also, proving, to be terrible politics in the process. Most interesting, we can see that anarchism is deeply rooted in religion, and is probably the only reason the realization of anarchy has actually survived into the 18th and 19th century. Now, according to Britannica, and noted by other scholars, the rejection of political authority has a rich pedigree. It extends back to the classical antiquity, to the Stoics and the Cynics, and runs through the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, as illustrated by dissenting Christian sects such as the medieval Catharists and certain factions of Anabaptists. Now, for such groups, the rejection of government was merely one aspect of a retreat from the material world into the realm of the spiritual grace. And as a part of the search for individual salvation, it was hardly compatible with the socio-political doctrine of anarchism. End quote. Anarchy is first realized in the mid-16th century in England by Gerard Winstanley, a Christian founder of the Digger movement. He had many ideals, some of which later become anarchist principles. He created a small village of like-minded people, which even long after the very small village was completely destroyed and seemingly disappeared, it was later revived by a minister, William Godwin. He used religious values and ideals to sell anarchist principles to these people. Now, although his ideas had an underground social influence on the British labor movement, they had zero influence or effect on the political anarchist movement in Europe during the mid-19th century. Now, Bakunin was a known supporter of the nationalist-type revolutionary movements in multiple Slav countries. As I previously mentioned, he had become aware of Proudhon in the 1940s. Bakunin later went international when he founded his own proto-anarchist organization known as the Social Democratic Alliance, which apparently was a big deal in Italy, Spain, Switzerland, and the Rhone Valley in France. Now, he modified Proudhonian teachings into a doctrine, belief, principle systems to become known as collectivism. Bakunin and Proudhon had several beliefs in common, but some of them not so much. For example, Bakunin and Proudhon seemed to agree on federalism and direct action working class, but they strongly disagreed on property rights. Now, another big difference was the revolutionary tactics. Proudhon simply didn't like the labels of the systematic ways of ism to achieve anarchy. He believed that starting in the existing society with the community as to live a particular lifestyle, you would evolve society and eventually grow into the majority, thus the fruits of natural evolution, which would bring about anarchy. On the other hand, Bakunin's ideals reflected more political and systematic force through aggression against those who did not agree. To rid the existing establishments through sheer force, I mean, come on. Who isn't doing that in their revolutions, right? So Proudhon's wisdom, it's been lost, and his ideals have been perverted into systems. These so-called anarchy systems or isms that came to be in every case over a century had destroyed the individual and replaced it with collectivism. It seems just to be the way of today's anarchists as well. When you remove the individual, you remove the freedom. Now, you do not define my freedom, and I do not consent. Bakunin's needs for collectivism and violent revolutionary action took deep root in anarchism for the first international movement, to the end of the dwindling violent ideologies of anarchism, which ended up being the historically largest movement in Spain at the end of the Spanish War in 1939. There were various sects of anarchism in Spain, such as expropriative peasant, urban anarcho-syndicalism, or what's sometimes referred to as pure anarchism. There's urban anarcho-syndicalism, created by the liberal trade union, syndicalisme for French, the trade for trade unionism. How about that? Bakunin died in 1876, a hero to many. Crazy. So, Peter Kropotkin, an ideological leader who was a prince, but dropped the title when he became a revolutionary in 1872. He led quite the busy and successful life. He was an educated man who served the military and studied animal life. He contributed to the knowledge we have on the last ice age. Now, Kropotkin succeeded Bakunin while under the influence of the Russian revolutionary comrade, French geographer Élisée Reclus, from a formal disciple of the French utopian socialist Charles Fourier. Kropotkin was father to a variation of the anarchist theory known as anarchist communism. Now, under the principles of the past anarchists with the idea of anarchy in mind, the ideological mind of Kropotkin argued that the means of production should be owned cooperatively, but that there should be distribution and that it should be purely communism. This theory reminded people of Sir Thomas More's Utopia of 1516. Kropotkin fantasized of organized society of communists in a free federation. Kropotkin wrote an article on anarchism for the 11th edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica. Very interesting. He claims that harmony in such a society being obtained not by submission to law or by obedience to any authority, but by free agreements concluded between the various groups. He's speaking from a place of ism, but his idea came from a more pure place, I would think, a more harmonic place. Because as I've said, anarchy cannot be achieved through anarchism. It is the reward of having a society with the evolved spirits and minds whom live in harmony. He is explaining essentially the same thing, but through ism, and it can't be brought through ism or any sort of system likewise. So when a certain mind frame or level of consciousness is obtained, the social engagement will follow without thought, and all the needs will be met. This is impossible through rules or with any sort of organized doctrine. I think it's also interesting that he explains anarchy is not a utopia by any means. Very different from today's anarchist fantasies. So Kropotkin says, in common with most socialists, the anarchists recognize that, like all evolution in nature, the slow evolution of society is followed from time to time by periods of accelerated evolution, which are called revolutions. And they think that the era of revolutions is not closed yet. Periods of rapid change will follow the periods of slow evolution, and these periods must be taken advantage of, not for increasing and widening the powers of the state, but for reducing them, through the organization in every township or commune of the local group of producers and consumers, and also the regional and eventually the international federations of these groups. End quote. So it's safe to say that logic, history, and some of the great theological minds in history recognize anarchism as having to be forceful or aggressive at some point. which makes sense because, again, it is ism. Revolutionary is always a must, but some systems can survive without force. Anarchists can't agree with each other, let alone the rest of society. Now, like all isms, it requires force in the aim of politics. As anarchists moved into the 19th century, residue from the late 18th century left revolution in the form of terrorism, killing off prominent politicians and elitist figures. Individuals would do so with hopes to inspire the masses to act out collectively and take to the streets to destroy the state. Anarchist activism was so in your face it was the new black, or the new social bad boy. It had become attractive to artists of all kinds, including painters Gustave Courbet, disciple of Proudhon, Camille Pissarro, Georges Seurat, Paul Signac, and writers Paul Adam, Octave Mirabeau, Laurel Hyde, and Felix Fénéon. The symbolist poet, Stephanie Mallarmé or something, she was a sympathizer. In English, Irish poet Oscar Wilde labeled himself as an anarchist and under Kropotkin's inspiration wrote the essay The Soul of Man Under Socialism in 1891. On the other hand, French anarchists had practiced individualist values so well that they became alienated from their own politics. Meanwhile, others who adopted Kropotkin's anarchist, communist, socialist ideas, they refused to recognize any limitations at all whatsoever to the rights of the individual. They recognized the idea of the natural evolution and even acknowledged the social sickness that is ism system, and that there is zero limits to what you can do without those isms. Now, these guys have been known to be reluctant in creating any organized group that could possibly be a threat to freedom, and they showed a distaste for institutions. So, why did these so-called founding fathers have such a distaste for these systems? They're the founding fathers, right? So even the groups who actually held the title ism, the labels, they didn't like ism. So why does a system claim these folks who speak out on them? Why do they claim, and they're exposing the system? So because ism is bad, so they're exposing. I can't say it enough. The ism system is a disease. Its purpose is to infect and claim everything. And so these guys are speaking truth. Ism stepped in and said, that's mine. Thank you. This is also what happens to the cosmic truth, the universal truth of all things. How the church claimed authority over all these truths. But in the details, what's really happening? What's really going on? Why was it all forgotten among the new generations? How did these things work themselves out and we just don't know about them now? How? I wondered. From English, French, Russian, Spain, American, Japanese, Chinese, Korean, throughout the whole various cultural versions and history that surrounds, anarchism, it's been nothing more than a political ideology. Always has been. It has been founded out of socialism and has immediately created sects of communism, and it's branched out in both parties since, and has formed all kinds of mini sects. Today, anarchism seems to be lost. Anarchists have forgotten that anarchism is just a socialist ideology, while denying all the systems through their use of system. Yet, in true freedom, otherwise known as anarchy, cannot be defined through ism or system. Though many of the ideals that would bring about anarchy are often used in various isms, just like how religion takes the truth and waters down the occult to keep you particularly broken and coming back. The way Western medicine keeps you alive well enough to keep you coming back for more. Anarchism takes real values, real truth, but because man is stuck in the mentality of control, stuck in the mind of ism, these individuals' truths, they become, on a general scope, they're made, fit everyone. They tarnish the truth, ignoring the natural order of all things, and it keeps our world stagnant. I think there's some debatable pieces, but for the most part, I found Britannica being pretty well written on the history. I only touched a little bit on it, and it's a lot to talk about, but if you aren't familiar with it, I would strongly recommend the reading. And I'll share some links down below in the description box. And of course, this is a start, and there are dozens of academic papers and books on the topic. So we just got a little below the surface maybe. I recommend them all for anyone truly trying to understand anarchy, anarchism, and anarchists. I admittedly could probably still read more. But at this point in the game, the picture is very clear. I found it on the spirit, and then I read the surface, and this is what I find. While anarchists deny each other and deny their own past, the biggest challenge for anyone these days is the power of ism. What they are, how they function. I've already defined systems as a functioning machine that has standards which have to be met if the system is to function. Remember, Oxford said, set of things work together as part of a mechanism or an interconnecting network of a complex whole. Not only is this true for ism, it is true for the anarchist society. So what happens if one of the cogs or springs aren't working? Or what if one of the counties or countries or towns? Or what if the one single person doesn't define these principles the same way as the next? I can think of several social issues that anarchists don't agree on, and I've mentioned them in part 1. We talked about that. That's just a start. That's just the buzz stuff of today. The modern principles of anarchism alone do not solve these issues between both anarchists and society. They don't now, they won't in the future. Anarchy has no principles because it is a state of being. Our moral values are subjective. We gain moral values from what rules us. For example, a statist, when asked about right and wrong, they will always cite the law. Like, the law is the most unmoral thing. A person who is ruled by their religious dogmas will always refer to scripture and perhaps, maybe more specifically, the 10 Commandments or something equivalent. A person who is ruled by their peers will often gain the same moral justification approved by their peers. And if all these groups come together under the same principles, rules, doctrines, faith, policies, etc., they will still define morality, good or bad, differently. Some groups even define who or what people actually are differently. I've been told multiple times that a healthy community, society, requires democracy, but how can democracy be freedom? Furthermore, how can it be anarchy? It can't, because it's not. It's anarchism. Anarchists claim to practice anarchy, but the very nature of anarchy is contradictory to practice, and so it's not anarchy, it's anarchism. So again, I'm going to beat it again. Anarchy is a state of being. It's not even a thought. And for those who don't understand that systems are enforced and anything enforced is done through a type of force, even if it's not blatant violence, I like to cite just a few pieces here concerning social systems and systems in general. So we can talk about those passive-aggressive, forceful ways that societies operate. Now, we can see a clearer picture of how the words work I've already cited and been defined when we did the Oxford and Webster stuff. Now, function this into a social context, and let's see how this stuff kind of unfolds in a social setting. Now, let me start with Wiki. Now, I know that's not the strongest source, but it has some legitimate information that has been cited, pretty well within it. And, you can always look for yourself, right? Social rule system theory is an attempt to formally approach different kinds of social rule systems in a unified manner. Social rule systems include institutions such as norms, laws, regulations, taboos, customs, and a variety of related concepts are important in the social sciences and humanities. Social rule system theories is fundamentally an institutionalist approach to the social sciences, but it is placing primacy on institutions and its use of set of rules to define concepts in social theory. Okay, wow, got it. Pretty spot on. I agree. That's what I gathered. So it goes on to say, social rule system theory notes that most human social activity is organized and regulated by socially produced and reproduced systems of rules. These rules have a tangible existence in society, in language, customs, codes, conducts, norms, and laws, and in social institutions such as family, community, market, business enterprises, and government agencies. Thus, this theory posits that the making, interpretation, and implementation of social rules are universal in human society, as are their reformulation and transformation. Human agents, individuals, groups, organizations, communities, and other collectives, produce, carry, and reform these systems of social rules, and this frequently takes place in a way that they neither intend or expected. This does not mean that social rule systems do not change. They can and they do, and that change can be indigenous and exogenous to society. The implementation of rules and the maintenance of some order always calls for cumulative experience, adjustment, adaptation, etc. In such ways, normative and institutional innovation is generated. There is a continual interplay, a dialect, if you will, between the regulated and the unregulated. What is more, at the same time that the social rule systems strongly influence actions and interactions, they are formed and reformed by the actors involved. Human agency is manifest in this dialectal process played out by participating actors having their specific competencies and endowments, their situational analysis, interpretations, and strategic responses to mediate pushes and pulls to which they are subject. Okay, still very dry, but spot on. I mean, this is it. This is what we're talking about. The robot society, zombie society. I mean, that's where you end up anyway. So let's look at a couple other things and wrap this talk up. So social rule system theory is an adherence to and compliance with social rules. Let's continue. Actors adhere to and implement rule and rule systems to varying degrees. Compliance with or refusal to comply with particular rules are complicated cognitive and normative processes. Typically, there are diverse reasons for rule compliance. Several of the most important factors are interest factors and instrumentalism, stress by public choice and Marxist perspectives on self-interested behavior. Actors may advocate rules to gain benefits or to avoid losses and or identity and status. Adherence to rules and commitment to the realization may be connected to an actor's identity, role, or status, and to the desire represent self as identified by or committed to particular rules. It follows that a major motivation in maintaining or changing rules is to maintain or change their social status. Authoritative legitimacy and sacrality, for example, role complexes or distributive rules where many rules are accepted and adhered to because persons or groups with social authority have defined or determined them, possibly by associating them with sacred principles or identifying their casual or symbolic relationship to actors' interests and statuses. Into the contemporary world, we find the widespread institutionalization of abstract meta rules of compliance that orient people to accepting particular definitions of reality and rule systems propagated by socially defined or often certified authorities like scientists or whatever experts. The authority may be scientific, religious, or political. It could be the instance in the latter case where the fact that the democratic agency has determined the rules according to the right and proper procedures. Certain rules may even be associated with God, the sacred, and in general, those beings or things that actors stand in awe of, have great respect for and may associate with or share in their charisma by adhering to or following their rules. Now, with normative cognitive order, actors may follow rules and try to ensure that others follow them because the rules fit into a cognitive frame or for ongoing their perceptions and making sense of what is going on. Now, people react negatively to defiance, even in cases where they are not directly affected. That is where, no direct apparent self-interest is taking place. Because the order is disturbed, potentially, destabilizing and eroded. Teamsters clashed with riot police in the Minneapolis Teamsters strike of 1934. Both groups used various methods to assure compliance with institutional rules. Now, this takes us to social sanctions, where laws and formal organizational rules and regulations are typically backed up by specific social sanctions and designated agents assigned to the responsibility and authority to enforce the rules. There are a variety of social controls and sanctions in any social group or organization, which are intended to induce or motivate actors to adhere or to follow the rules, ranging from coercion to more symbolic forms of social approval or disapproval, persuasion, even activation of commitments, in effect, promises that have been already made. And in order to gain entrance in or to remain in the group, you have to comply with the key group rules and role definitions. Exclusion from these groups, if there are no alternative groups, it becomes a powerful sanction. And so that brings us to inherent sanctions, where Many rules, when adhered to in specific action settings, result in gains or payoffs that are inherent in following those rules, such as going with or against the automobile traffic, right? In many cases, the reasons for compliance are consequentialist. So, as many social scientists point out, in auto traffic, we adhere to or accept the rules as proper, in particular those relating to stopping, turning, and etc., because without them, we recognize that the situation could be chaotic, dangerous, and even catastrophic. So most technical rules, for example, relating to operating machines or using tools, they entail inherent sanctions. Following them is necessary or considered necessary for proper functioning or performance of the technology or achieving the certain desirable outcome or solution. Now, with the veil of ignorance, actors may not know the consequences of rule compliance and follow rules because they are given or taken for granted, or believed generally to be proper, to be right and proper. So the benefit of adhering to some rule systems can, however, mask hidden costs, like habits, routines, and scripts. Much of the rule following behavior is unreflective and routine, like a program. Many social rules are unverbalized, tacit, that is, a part of a collective subconscious, or strategies, roles, and scripts learned early in life or your career and then reinforced in repeated social situations. For instance, male and female sex roles, men do this, women do that, or even many professional roles, teacher, doctor. In a similar context, I've already shared a talk about racism and how the adoption of ism and abstracts as an identity is sick and how it is highly dangerous. And more in context, I did a talk on ism where I discussed more in depth the personal, interpersonal, and institutional levels where ism takes place and its rewards and punishment systems. All these talks go hand in hand with each other. If you haven't watched them, the links are down below. Give it a go if you like to think. They are much shorter talks than this one, except for the Anarchy one. This one's pretty long. Now, anyway, human beings acquire and learn culture, rules and roles in part through being taught, in part through observing and learning, patterns generated by others. That is both through verbal and nonverbal communication. So, of particular importance is the fact that rule systems learned early in socialization are associated with very basic values and meanings, even personal and collective identity, motivating at a deep emotional level a strong commitment to the rules and profound personal satisfaction when enacting them. Conformity is then a matter of habitual, unreflected, and taken for granted ways of doing things. Right? Yeah, now, looking at social control, we consider social values. Social values are the result of an individual internalizing certain norms and values. Social values present in individuals are products of informal social control, exercised implicitly by a society through particular customs, norms, and more. Individuals internalize the values of their society, whether conscious or not of the indoctrination. Traditional societies relies mostly on informal social control, embedded in its customary culture to socialize its members. The internalization of these values and norms is known as a process called socialization. Now, moving to sanctions. Sanctions. Informal sanctions may include shame, ridicule, sarcasm, criticism, and disapproval, which can cause an individual to stray towards the social norms of that society. In extreme cases, sanctions may include social discrimination and exclusion. Informal social control usually has more effect on the individuals because the social values become internalized, thus becoming an aspect of the individual's personality. Informal sanctions check deviant behavior. So, an example of negative sanction, it would come from maybe the scene from Pink Floyd, the film Pink Floyd The Wall, right, where the young protagonist is ridiculed and verbally abused by a high school teacher for writing poetry in a mathematics class. Another example is the movie about a boy, I don't remember, when he hesitates to jump from a springboard and is ridiculed for his fear, and then he eventually jumps. His behavior is, it's controlled by his shame and all this stuff. Now, we have reward and punishment. And see also mesolimbic pathway and reward system, where Informal controls reward or punish acceptable or unacceptable behavior and are varied from individual to individual, group to group, and society to society. For example, at a women's institute meeting, a disapproving look might convey the message that it's inappropriate to flirt with the minister. In a criminal gang, on the other hand, right, a stronger sanction applies in the case of someone threatening to inform the police, being a snitch, right? Social control by use of reward is known as positive reinforcement. In society, the laws and regulations implemented by the government tend to focus on punishment for enforcing negative sanctions to act as a deterrent as a means of social control. So that brings us to theoretical bias with the modern media. Theorists such as Noam Chomsky have argued that systematic bias exists in the modern media. The marketing, advertising, and the public relations industries have thus been said to utilize mass communications to aid the interests of certain political and business elites. Powerful ideological, economic, and religious lobbyists have often used social systems and centralized electronic communications to influence public opinion. End quote, right? Boy, that doesn't sound familiar, does it? In the United States, early societies were able to easily expel individuals deemed undesirable from public space through vagrancy laws and other forms of banishment. In the 1960s and 70s, however, these exclusion orders were denounced as unconstitutional in America and consequently were rejected by the Supreme Court. So, plus, do we really need to talk about the blatant positive and negative reinforcements that have taken place in this last 4 years? I mean, this stuff should be pretty commonplace now. Everyone should be identifying these pretty easy, right? So, in cases like this, what will stop a lawless land from such practices? I already see the behavior from people I engage with now. Ashley Crossman said, social control within sociology refers to the many ways in which our behavior, thoughts, and appearances are regulated by the norms, rules, laws, and social structures of society. Social control is a necessary component of social order, for society could not exist without it. And then wrote a great piece on how social systems in the form of the enforced can be a great form of social control. Okay, social control. Enough of that. For me, this is all just a spiritual understanding. It all came to me originally that way. And then I spent time articulating with the available sciences, studying, learning so I could talk with others about it. Instead of just saying, my feelings. I feel this, I see that, my spirit tells me. It's been difficult to do that. So we've been trying to be a little more sensible. And so likewise, I would imagine that for many people out there, this is all common sense or spiritually guided information for them as well. But if you still absolutely cannot grasp that all isms are systems that can only exist through enforcement, then I offer the last piece I have here. It's a quote from an academic paper from an institution, actually. It says, and I quote, "Understanding the differences between and relationships among norms, institutions, and social facts is complicated by ambiguities in the concept of rules and the concept of enforcement, explicitly and therefore formally." So, hopefully, we can see that institutions are the agreed upon rules of human interaction within a group or an organization and the means and method of their enforcement. An organization can be an organization of organizations, and rules can apply across organizations as well as within. Norms and behaviors are repeated patterns of human behavior within a group, and no matter its size, that occur regularly enough that individuals form expectations about the behaviors of others. We gauge ourselves based on others' behavior, and so the patterns are followed, often enough that a small or individual deviations don't change the expectations. All norms are subject to change if the behavior change. Social facts are features of the world around us, and that they derive from actions of the individuals and groups and institutions. And norms are both social facts, but they do not exhaust the social facts in any group or society. In general, social facts are not within the controls of individuals, but this feature of social fact varies from scale, families versus nations, and the type of social fact. The paper then goes on a great depth into rules and how they are applied into isms, or social settings, not just the clips I quoted already. Not to mention the lifetime of information worth reading on this topic. There's a science on how these systems work of all kinds, right? So let me finally sum this up. Man, talk about a dead horse, right? Anarchy is a state of being, a state that is not fueled by any ideas or has gained support through campaign or awareness. It is not brought about by any form of abstracts. And again, it's not even a thought. It is the fruition of evolving into a high enough consciousness to be without ism. Now, anarchism, it is arguably a religion. By definition, it's a type of raw political ideology that has spawned several political groups throughout history. It is a system structured, organized, and forced around basic principle, theory, doctrine, rule, belief, faith, policy, practice of life and conduct, under which society is conceived without government, through voluntary engagement without direct coercion, yet it requires forceful revolution on non-believers and has a requirement of the like minds through its standards, much like a democracy or a democratic society. Nevertheless, it is a system that promises a utopia at the end of the road, and like all isms, religious, political, social, or whatever, anarchist followers believe that it is the definitive truth, and anyone who cannot fall in line with anarchism is not welcome, and means of enforcement will take place, where individuality is not welcome because the collective is the sole importance. The truth is, ism and individuality cannot exist side by side. They never have, and by definition, they never will. There's no such thing as ism for self. Even if you worship yourself, you're still bound by rules or rulers. Such an egotistic ism can't last forever, and the longer it lasts, the harder it falls. Where there is no individual, there is no freedom. The anarchists of today compared to historically, they're completely different. In the past, some anarchists did not agree generally and had solid aims and solid goals, but was a clear understanding of what. Today, it seems to be groups of people who are desperately just trying to find themselves, struggling with identity, definition, and purpose. Many of them hold the basic principles of anarchism high above all others and say, this is all we need. Yet we need more. Today's anarchists appear to be in their infant stages of perhaps something new. Regardless, ism is not bringing about anarchy. Anarchism is an ism, a system, a political, religious, and or social rule. Anarchism is bound by doctrine, rules, philosophy, which are things that are all bound by systems, which are all bound by force. If there is any hope for a purely functional anarchy state, it is very clear. Anarchy cannot be achieved through anarchism. Ism is the sickness that called for the ideals of anarchism. The world is sick, and we have forgotten so much concerning who we really are and what we're really capable of. We need generations of real education, deprogramming, and real knowledge of self. And until we can reconnect with the humanity inside, learn to love ourselves, and I mean truly love ourselves, we can't love our planet, and we can't even love our neighbor, we can't love each other. There is a domino effect of having a much larger consciousness and living lifestyles that are truly in pursuit of real fulfillment. Striving to thrive so we can just stop trying to survive. Truth concerning lifestyles that seem so unrealistic or unappealing to the out-of-touch masses. A foundation that exhibits value for life. Living in a manner that builds upon that foundation. It's a lot of work. Yeah, it's easier said than done. But once it's done, a different kind of world will surely exist where ideals don't push out governments and isms through revolution, but the ideals dissolve into truth and become reality, creating an environment where there is no need for government or ism of any kind. There's a thin line in understanding these things that apparently not everyone can grasp. It is very asinine, to bring about a society, and I often compare it to parents when they smack their child for hitting, their siblings because, hitting is bad. It will always and every time seed every individual with the heart of revolution in a never-ending cycle. This is why anarchy will never work through anarchism. It is only when love for ourselves and each other is great and ignorance is non-existence that we can be blessed with anarchy. So, if you're looking for a simple explanation, here's for the folks for that simple explanation. Here we go. Ready? Let's wrap it up. Anarchism is a disease. Anarchism today is a paradox. Anarchism yesterday was a political movement. All isms are a disease on society. In all points in time, anarchism has been forceful. Sometimes anarchists admit it, sometimes they don't, but it's always true. And anarchy is not related to anarchism, nor will it ever be achieved through ism. And if you're not buying it, well, I recommend watching both talks, part 1 and 2, because there are no shortcuts here. And if you did watch both talks, I am super grateful, and hopefully I've made it clear. Hopefully we've done a good enough job. You spent the time, hopefully I did it good. I'm really so grateful for you. Thank you for watching. I really hope that folks will meditate and pray upon my words here today. I love you all, and I want you to know these things. I want to build a better future for my kids, for my family. And why not everyone else? You can only find truth and happiness internally with the Spirit, and that's been called the Christ mind. And therefore it seems to remove all ism and to live that, to bring about anarchy, one would have to do so by spiritual knowing. And it seems to achieve this and not fail is into a disharmonized life, or otherwise disaster, is to live a life that is committed to pursuance of that Spirit in every area of your life. The Spirit will lead a natural or a harmonic life to be in harmony, with the Spirit and nature. If you follow the Spirit, this is not to be mistaken for ruled by God. This is the ploy of ism. When we remove ism from religion, we are left with love, real love, and not what other people are redefining as love to suit their feelings and lust. Love is not binding, it's freeing, though it is committed. And like anarchy, you must cultivate, your happy. And no, it's not easy. It takes work, some refinement of ourselves, and when it is achieved, it is undefinable. Just absolutely amazing, completely liberating. What kind of life, in what kind of world and community do you all want to have and live in? Stay conscious. Stay blessed. God bless.